You're listening to the Today's Eden podcast, episode 33. 33 piles of shoes on the floor, 33 piles of shoes. This is where the struggles are real, the callings are heavy, the kids are sticky. We come together because it takes a village, and this is your tribe. Hey guys, happy Wednesday, or at least I hope it's a happy Wednesday for you because I know that Wednesdays can be rough. So I'm so glad that you're listening to this podcast, and I'm so glad that you are, you could be doing anything right now, but you're choosing to listen to me talk, and so I really appreciate that, and I think we should be best friends. So anyways, getting on with this podcast episode, I am super excited to have Merritt on the show today. She recently had me on her podcast, the Devoted Dreamers podcast, which I will link in the show notes if you want to hear my interview with her. And we got to talking, and I really, really wanted to have her on. And I am so glad that I did because she is talking about something that I've been really curious about, and I knew absolutely nothing about really, and that is embryo adoption. And so she just talks about her and her husband's journey through that and how they came to that decision, her kind of journey through singleness and what it looked like when she got married after all that time, just living your life on your own and having your own habits and own ways of doing things, and how they came together and in a messy way, and then also figured out how to make marriage work as two different people coming together. And also we talk about age, man, and just how age ain't nothing but a number. And I just really enjoyed talking to her, and I hope you guys enjoy this episode. I hope you're encouraged by it, and I hope that maybe it teaches you about something that you didn't know before. All right, guys, I'm super excited to share with you the conversation with Merritt. Let's get to it. Hey, Merritt, thank you so much for being on the Today's Eden podcast. I am super excited to have you because I got to have the privilege of being on your podcast, the Devoted Dreamers podcast. And so I'm really, really excited to talk to you, and especially about some of the topics that we're going to cover today. I am really encouraged by just hearing your story and going through the mess and the nitty gritty of just life, motherhood, and marriage with you.
Well, thank you so much for having me and wanting to hear my story.
Yes. So before we get into, the story, I just want to have you give the listeners a little idea of who you are, kind of, what life looks like, what your family consists of, all that stuff.
Sure. Okay, so I'm going to start off with the bold, hard thing, which is I'm 47 years old, and this is my year of owning my age. I haven't really wanted to do that a lot in the past. I'm 47 years old, and I have a 2.5-year-old little girl. I'm married to my sweet husband, Todd. We've been married for, since 2009. We'll say it that way. So that's like 7.5 years. And we live in the Front Range of Colorado. We kind of chose to move here just to be part or closer to what we see as this beautiful God's creation of Colorado. And we're part of a church plant here. And we have had lots of ups and downs in life, as most people have had. I look forward to sharing more about some of those today.
Yeah, so that's funny that you say that about your age, because I just turned 29, and my husband, it turned 31, and for him, just like everybody else, he's like, 30 is the best ever. It was my best year ever, and you're just going to love 30. And I'm stuck at 29 right now, and I'm like, I do not want to move forward. I don't understand. I don't understand. And so I'm just like, can we just leave it at 29 and call it good?
Just forever, yeah. Right?
Yeah.
Why not?
Yeah, I know. So, so you guys have been married 7 years.
Yeah.
How?
I was 39.
You were 39 when you guys got married?
Mm-hmm.
So it took some singleness to find the right one for you then, I'm assuming. Or had you been in serious relationships before then?
Yeah. So I'll try to give it to you in a nutshell, but I became a Christian when I was 30. And prior to that, really had what I thought was just kind of like the normal life. I dated a lot, was very interested in getting married, but I was either dating guys who couldn't commit or couldn't commit to that extent.
Mm-hmm.
I now can see I was in a lot of tumultuous relationships. I had some tough things happen in my teens and early 20s that I think formed how I looked at men and relationships, and really spent a lot of time trying to get my needs met. And so that didn't make me a great partner,
Yeah.
but I always thought it was like somebody else's problem
Mm-hmm.
that my relationships weren't going
Yeah.
great. Um, but then I became a Christian at 30, and over the next 7 years, God really healed a lot of those past wounds and taught me about just relationship not being about me, that it wasn't about me being happy or getting my needs met, but that, first he created me to love him, and then um, to the best of my ability and through Christ, selflessly care for my spouse or, whoever God had put in my path. And for a long time, that was nobody. I mean, I really did have some long, long seasons of just wrestling with being lonely and wanting to be married and not understanding why, now that I was following God and, living the right way, I wasn't getting what I wanted. And a lot of that stuff, had to be worked out in the midst of, sadness and loneliness and grief, and just, crying out to God and being like, hey, what's going on here? And he was sure faithful, not just because he eventually gave me a husband, but because he showed himself to me and that he is trustworthy. And, scripture says your creator is your husband. And I looked at that in the middle of my singleness and was like, you have got to be kidding me. But he really was that for me in that time. And it wasn't always, every need was met. I was still, I had loneliness and I had questions. But today I feel like my faith is stronger because I had those really hard years walking with him and trying to trust that his plan was good.
What was going through your mind like when you were in that season of, singleness and loneliness? Like, how did you overcome the thoughts and like the need or the want to kind of rush things? Because I know that even in just dating relationships, we're kind of wired to be like, okay, this is how it goes. You meet, you get a boyfriend, then you date for a long time, and then this is what like it's like these are the steps, and so whether it's a guy that you is unhealthy relationship with you or whatever, like we always feel like, okay, we have to move on to the next step, and then when it doesn't happen, I feel like we kind of put a lot of pressure on ourselves to have the fairy tale ending like right now. So how did you kind of make it through that season of when things weren't working out like you thought it was going to work out?
Well, I will say it was not very pretty. um, I, even in just those early years of following Christ, I still kind of had this attitude of like shopping for a husband. That's what I called it.
Yeah.
Like I was always scanning the horizon. Like, what about him? What about him? He doesn't have a ring on his finger. What about him? And I mean, I look back now and I'm like, come on, get over yourself, go have a life. But that's where I was. And I mean, it really took, I think it was like in 2004, I went to, our church did a camp up in Estes Park. And at the time I was living in Dallas, and, it was just this gorgeous thing to drive into Colorado and be with all these people who love Jesus alongside you. And anyway, one of the guys, single guys on the trip, I was kind of like eyeing him and doing, what about you? And, and I'd known him before. So I was like, oh yeah, we get a chance to know each other better. And how can I finagle this whole thing? And, he shared some stuff on the retreat about like things in his life he was struggling with. And I can't even remember what those things were at this moment, but I remember this deep conviction from God that like, here I was like trying to get something from him, from this other guy. And in the midst of that, he was really wrestling and needing not a girlfriend.
Yeah.
He was needing God to be really real to him. And so, like, that was the first moment where I think God began to just like remove the scales from my eyes and show me what I had been doing and how that wasn't healthy for me, how that wasn't a healthy way to begin a relationship. And that it really wasn't up to me to make some guy fall in love with me. Like, I always thought, like, the hair has to be right and the makeup and the clothes. And if all the pieces are there, God will provide, or I will attract the right person. And so it was pretty messy in a lot of it. And I mean, this is kind of cliche, but he had to bring me to the end of myself, and for me to stop striving and always trying to orchestrate the next thing. I mean, I joke when I talk about one particular relationship in my mid 30s where when that broke up, I was, laying under my coffee table in a ball, just sobbing, like, come on. And I mean, and it's true. And I needed that. And I needed to face that my way, my design was not what he had planned. And now I don't even remember the question you asked, but suffice it to say, it was not pretty to survive that season of loneliness. And I mean, I had a ton of single girlfriends who were amazing. And so some of that I was like, well, we're all amazing, so it's not our fault, consoling myself with that rationalization. But yeah, I think ultimately it really was, I started to spend that time of loneliness just in God's word, pursuing just sincere, authentic friendships with women, trying to figure out what it looked like to live authentically. So to confess my sin, to repent, to be really open with people who were in my life and ask for help in areas that I needed help in. That was super humbling. And that helped me, I think, begin to get my eyes off of the things that I was idolizing and let go of that a little bit.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think that society doesn't help with that because
Not at all.
I remember being like, I don't even know, like elementary school age and playing that game MASH, where you like write down, who do you want your husbands to be and how many kids will you have, and like the car, the house, and then you go around and like at the end of it you're like, oh, I'm married to Matt with a mansion and we have 4 kids and he's a movie star, or whatever.
Right.
And
it doesn't help at all.
Yeah, no. And then, everything is just kind of like your end goal is to be married and to have kids and to have, this happily ever after thing. And then I think it does turn kind of marriage into an idol for us, to where we're missing the whole like experience of life. Like we're just zoned in on this one thing that is supposed to be our end goal, but like all that time in between, there's so much more that we are like called to do, and so much that is around us to see and to and so I think that can be really hard, and also set us up for like unrealistic expectations when we do get to the point of marriage and creating a family.
Absolutely. That was that was me too.
Yeah.
I mean,
so
totally set up for that.
Yeah, when you did become engaged to your husband and you guys got married and newlyweds, was it everything that you kind of had like all this time, you've been waiting for this moment? Was it everything that you had hoped it was, or do you think that all that time of waiting kind of set you up for like those expectations that were unrealistic?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure I noticed it at the time.
Yeah.
But yes, I would say the first week, meaning when we were in Mexico on our honeymoon, it was all that I had hoped. And then we came home to real life.
Yeah.
And that was hard. And, all the baggage comes out. And it just, I think the hardest thing to wrestle with in my first year of marriage was I felt disappointed over this thing that I had wanted for so long and had finally gotten. And why wasn't it, you know, perfect?
Yeah.
Why wasn't, and I mean, I hate even saying that because we went through, long preparation for marriage, like, premarital classes and premarital counseling. And we were serving in recovery ministry. So we knew marriage is not easy. And we'd walked through lots of other people's marriage struggles with them. But I think we were just naive. I was naive. I'll just speak for myself. I did not realize how much we had to work through as a couple, trying to become one. And, coming at it, we were both, I was almost 40 and he was 40. And so we had lots of years of, this is the way things are done.
Yeah.
And the other person didn't feel that same way.
Yeah.
So it was hard. It's really, really hard.
So how did you guys work through that? Because you're like,
Yeah. We still have some of that. Like, I do it this way, you do it that way. We're just going to have to, learn to concede that, and that's okay. But probably the biggest thing for us, I think it was New Year's Day. We'd gotten married in early November, so it hadn't even been 3 months. And our biggest fight was about me going to the Social Security office and changing my name and not talking to him about it first. And I mean, details don't matter, but I hadn't decided what I was going to change it to until I got there. And it just, it was not really about that. People helped us figure out that the fight was not about what I had changed my name to or not, but we just hadn't been loving one another well, and we couldn't get past this like one big thorn in our relationship. And so we ended up calling another couple who'd been married longer, thankfully, and had been through a lot of this stuff. And they brought us to their dining room table and they were like, okay, talk it out, like say all the things. And they really helped us figure out that it wasn't that, I had kept my maiden name as my middle name or whatever. Like, it wasn't about that. It was that we were still learning what it looked like to love one another. And we hadn't been doing a very good job of that. And so we both were feeling hurt and resentful. And just this one little thing turned into a mountain, I mean, we didn't talk for 24 hours. And at some point it was like, well, we need help. Yeah. So bringing other people in really helped a ton. And I think we need to continue to do that as our marriage ages, I guess is the word. But the struggles don't change. I mean, life changes so much. It's been really challenging to have a small child and to maintain intimacy and closeness. And when somebody's crying in the next room or begging you for something or acting out or whatever, it's like, okay, I got to go address the thing that's most pressing or loud at this moment. So we continue to need that help.
Yeah, that's hard because I think anybody, we're just like creatures of habit. And then even if you get married at a younger age, like you still have a lot of years that you've been by yourself, you do things your way. And then coming together, it's like, okay, now we have to make this somehow work, even though, I don't know. Yeah. You put the dishes in this way and I put the dishes in this way.
Exactly. And some days you have to go, that is not a big deal. Yes, even totally against your flesh. Like, it has to be done this way. And it's like, no, small things are small things. We need to keep them that way.
Yeah. Otherwise, there'd be a bunch of married people like constantly fighting. So, I think that you just kind of choose your battles and, like, is it really a big deal that it's done the wrong way? Like, at least it's done and you don't have to do it. And it is what it is. And, but that definitely, I had to learn that too. And then now there's things that, my husband just lets me do, and he knows that it's easier for him to just let me do it. And so it doesn't cause any conflict. And,
right.
But it's definitely hard to find that that balance. And especially, when we first got married, that was one thing that we talked about. We did a meeting with another couple. Actually, the husband married us, but before we got married, we met with him once a week, and we went through this Bible study, and it was basically about expectations and coming into a marriage with, each of you comes into a marriage with a box of expectations, and it's like she expects you to be, you to be all these things, and you to, and then it's like, okay, but what is realistic here? Like, what is, because we do come, we have those lists of like, okay, he's going to be successful, he's going to have brown hair, he's going to be tall, he's going to, he's going
Right.
to, and, it doesn't, that's not really what marriage is about, or what really love's about. So it's so hard.
Yeah, I'll tell this one little story. I was reading, I'm not even going to remember the name of it now, but I was reading a book when we were dating,
Yeah.
and it was all about, kind of men and how men like to pursue and go on adventure and, just kind of that whole theme.
Yeah.
And I approached Todd at one point and I was like, what adventure are you going to take me on? Like, great question, And he looked at me and was silent for a minute. And then he goes, I have nothing to offer you but my character. And I was like, whoa. First of all, I had never not physically, I had never intellectually thought, what is this man's character like that I'm considering dating or marrying? I'd never had that thought before, which sounds bizarre at this point, but I really hadn't thought about it. And, I wanted adventure. I wanted mystery. I wanted romance. And he was like, hey, I'm a sincere, loyal person who will love you till the day you die. Mm-hmm. Is that what you're looking for or not?
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Anyway.
That's a good point, because kind of having the same conversation with my husband, and then just realizing that's that is not real love. That's just, they're just, entertaining you. And, if your relationships, whether it's intimacy or whatever, does not look like it is in the movies, that doesn't mean that you're failing. It just means you're human. You're not an actress. You're not an actor for entertainment. You're real people.
Yeah. And no one wrote the script for your life
Right.
telling you what to say or do next.
Yeah. Yeah, really. So when guys, when did you decide to have a baby after you guys got married? And how did that change things?
Okay. Yeah. So even though we were older, we made this conscious decision that we were not going to intentionally try to conceive for a year. Especially kind of after some of the rocky first months, we needed to learn how to love each other well, learn what it was like to live together, just get our ground under us before we added another person to the mix. And so the long story is that we, after about a year, ended up being a little bit longer because I ended up going overseas and having to take malaria medication. And the doctor was like, well, you can't try for 6 months now. And so it was all these things standing in the way of my, what do they say? Your clock is ticking.
Yeah.
So my clock had been ticking for a really long time. And we knew it would be challenging, if not impossible, for us to have biological children. And so we started trying, and that was super challenging. I mean, I'm sure, probably half your audience can relate to, every 28 to 30 days, that disappointment of well, I'm not pregnant again. And how hard that is and sad that is when you really deeply want to grow your family and want to have a child. And we did that for a long time, it felt like. And in the middle of that, ended up moving here to Colorado and finally started to speak to some specialists about what might be going on other than our age, or was it just age? And We ended up at a fertility clinic, and the doctor was like, well, you need to do IVF. That's the only chance you have. And we were like, well, that's not really the route that we had planned. If we were going to spend that much money to try to have a baby, we thought we might adopt.
Yeah.
Um, but he went ahead and was like, well, let's try Clomid, which is, I think what it actually does is makes you ovulate more than one egg, or follicle. I don't know the right words, but so we tried Clomid 1 month, and I ended up getting pregnant, and we quickly lost that baby. And that was in early 2012. And I mean, it was like this high to this crushing ache of, oh my, like I mean, you always know that's a possibility, but I hadn't really understood how painful that was to experience miscarriage. And it was really at that point, I was almost 42, and I shut down a bit on that let's try to have a baby thing. And we just stopped it all. We stopped seeing the fertility specialist. We stopped, intentionally trying. And we just tried to heal together from that loss. And it was probably 8 months later that a friend of mine who had adopted was like, hey, have you heard of this book, Adopted for Life? And I was like, no, you should really read it. Like, even if you're not interested in adoption, I just really think you should read it. And it was a beautiful, kind of heart-changing moment for me of just, I'd kind of always thought adoption could be in my future, but when it was kind of facing me as like, this is my only option, or it felt at the time that was my only option, it just felt like one more way that I was missing out in life. All those years of singleness, all those years of childlessness, and I took it really personally, and just I wasn't in a place where I could consider that as my first option.
Yeah.
And that book really helped. Like, it really, it changed my heart. God changed my heart. And we started investigating what the options were for us just in our area. And we ultimately found Nightlight Christian Adoptions and their Snowflakes program, which is, as you mentioned, I think you mentioned earlier, embryo adoption is the route that we got really intrigued and excited about. And for people who've never heard of this, it's basically other families who have gone through the IVF process of, eggs are harvested and fertilized, and, the family will go ahead and use a certain number of those. The ones that aren't used for an immediate pregnancy are then frozen. And it's, first of all, unbelievable technology that you can freeze human life and then produce human life from it. But a lot of those families, and for a ton of years, doctors were, harvesting 30 eggs and fertilizing them all. And so then some families might have 25, frozen embryos. And what do they do with them? Like, they're not going to have 25 kids.
Yeah.
It's just not feasibly possible. And so Nightlight Christian Adoptions, one of a guy who was an attorney on their staff, I don't really know how it all started, but he kind of conceived of this idea of, let's go to those families. Let's go to these fertility clinics that have, human life lingering in frozen storage with no decisions being made whatsoever, and, see if there's an opportunity to match those families with other families who really want to have children. Mm-hmm. And so, the technology was there. It's not that they created the technology, because it's really, it's a frozen embryo transfer is what they call the procedure. And that's exactly what happens at the tail end of an IVF cycle. Is if your embryos were frozen, they thaw them and they put them in your uterus. But Nightlight stepped in to say, hey, what if we could give an opportunity for this not to be an anonymous relationship? Mm-hmm. So that's where we were really excited, because we could have gone to our fertility clinic and said, we need, eggs that are 23 years old, or we need sperm, or whatever it is. But instead, we wanted a relationship with a family that had probably been through some things that we'd been through, probably had struggled to conceive, probably were, I mean, who knows at what age. I think you can struggle at any age with fertility, but that we had some things aligned with. And they're a Christian adoption agency. And so we thought, wow, there'd be an interesting opportunity here for an open adoption, and hopefully, our kids to have a relationship with their kids and to know one another as they grow. And so that's how we ended up with our daughter. The long story, we were matched with a sweet family that they were older than us, and, had kind of finished out having kids and had more than they expected left over. And so we have had the privilege of meeting them a couple of times, and our daughter knows their kids, and, all the kids are probably too young to really have a clear understanding of what their relationship is with one another. But we're just so excited that, God has kind of seen fit to expand our family, not just with, a child, but with the family that, basically gave us this child.
Yeah.
And we have more embryos in frozen storage. And so that's the other really fun thing, is that you can do one adoption and potentially have more than one child. So we are getting ready to try to start that process up again here soon.
Oh, that's so awesome.
Yeah.
Congratulations then.
Thanks. It's a little nerve-wracking.
Yeah.
Like, before I had ever been pregnant, I was like, I can't wait to be pregnant. And now I'm like, well, I guess I'm going to be pregnant again.
Yeah.
Not super excited about that part, but, now that I know what it's like.
Yeah.
But willing to do it because we really believe our daughter would thrive with a sibling. So,
yeah. So I know that at the end of IVF, like you said, so they embed the egg into your uterus. So do you know, and I'm curious if you know the answer, why is it then if it's embedded for, I guess that gives you a better chance of carrying to full term and not miscarrying if you've had a history of miscarriage? Or how does that differ from if you guys were to try yourselves versus this way?
So IUI is the process of, I think that's what some people call insemination, where you use the mother's egg and you just try to get the sperm closer, or, give it a better chance. And so this is, and actually we didn't know that we could carry a baby. So that was the first hurdle to get through. We did some extra testing before we felt like we owed it to the embryos that if there was a reason for me to miscarry, we wanted to know that before we ever had one implanted. And so we did all that, $1,500 worth of lab work, which, who knows that's accurate. I don't know. I'm not a doctor. So we just trusted our doctor and said, yeah, if there's something we can find out from lab work, let's try it.
Yeah.
And they said, okay, you're good. They really look at your uterus. I have to do they call it a mock transfer. So they go in there and they pretend they're putting an embryo in there, and they check everything out and make sure there's no polyps, and that the size and shape of your uterus is okay to, have a successful pregnancy. And so all the ways that they can check your physical body, they do. And then we just said, okay, let's try and see what happens. And they monitored me for probably my first 10 weeks with pretty regular blood work, how's my progesterone doing? Is it enough to sustain a pregnancy? And once I got the all clear on all of that, and I went to my midwives and I was like, okay, so you're going to call me high risk because I'm 44 or whatever. But am I high risk? Because as it turns out, the the eggs used for our embryos were from an egg donor, and she was 22. And they were like, yeah, you basically, unless you show signs of high risk, we're considering you a 22-year-old pregnant woman.
Wow.
So, according to the baby growing
Yeah.
inside of me. And the other thing that a lot of people don't know that I think is so fascinating, but there has been some research done that on like, deceased mothers who have carried boys, where they can identify male cells within the woman's body because she had a male child growing within her. And so there's this theory that, well, I don't even know if it's a theory. I think there's proof that the mother and the child cells interact and mix with one another. And so, I had this concern, like, would I love this child like I might love my own biological child?
Yeah.
I think that's a real common question that people have when they consider adoption. And in this case, it was like, well, from the moment I watched myself, receive that embryo, she was mine. I didn't know she was a girl, but she was mine.
Yeah.
And I carried her like she was mine, and our cells intermingled. And the odd and funny thing is that people say all the time, like, she looks so much like your husband. And I'm like, well, I don't know how to explain that at all.
Sure. Yeah.
But she's so ours,
Yeah.
and it's really clear to us and everyone around us that she belongs to us. So anyway, but the reason we chose not to, try IUI or to do IVF on our own was just, the cost of all of that, with the doctor telling us that, my eggs were probably not great, just because of my age. And we were like, well, let's go down this road. And if there are 7 little babies somewhere that we could give a chance at life, we would love to do that.
Yeah, that's the crazy thing, is thinking about like little human lives in a freezer that are just waiting there. It's kind of it's just kind of fascinating to like think that all these kids could not be if people didn't know that they were there or that they were available, especially since like you said, some people have more eggs than what they end up using. And so then yeah, that's just so fascinating. So yeah, I didn't know we have another couple in our church that's going through embryo adoption, and you're kind of just like, I always want to be like, what is that? But then, so when you mentioned that, that was a journey that you guys have been, I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm so curious. Like, what is this? I need to know like how this works. And, I think that's just really awesome. How did you,
It's so fascinating.
Yeah. Like, so how did you guys, let me ask you this. So as parents who are, trying for a baby, and maybe especially towards like, women in their 40s, like how can we as moms support a couple like that in their 40s that are trying, that have miscarried? Like how can we serve, like how do you wish your friends or family had served you guys in that time? Like, what do you think would have been most helpful?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, miscarriage specifically, the couple that loved us in a way that like we didn't know to ask for was like this happened in March. I mean, I don't even know if it was the week after or pretty soon after, where we were still quite raw. And, going to church on a Sunday morning brought up a lot of emotion for a lot of different reasons. And, the last thing you want to do is be the one sobbing in the service that everyone's like staring at. You're trying not to stare, but you're like, why is that person crying? Yeah. And so the public space felt really hard because, everybody that was close to us knew, and there were probably people who were not close to us that knew, just, not out of gossip, but just like, hey, these are our people, we
Yeah.
care for them. They're hurting, pray for them. But there was one couple that was like, hey, we'd like to just come and sit with you. And we'd known them for a little while, at least a couple years. And they like came to our house. They brought us ice cream and they
Oh,
sat down at our kitchen table and they just let us talk. They asked really, good questions, not invasive, just like wanting us to be able to openly grieve,
mm-hmm.
and not have to hide that out of shame or whatever. And they held us, they cried with us, and they were just with us in it. And I think that's a really hard thing to do, when
Yeah.
you're the person that has that opportunity with someone who's hurting, to know that it's okay to just come and sit and you don't have to have the right thing to say. Like I mean, I literally cannot remember a word that was spoken other than maybe some things that I said. But I remember they came in love and they came with sugar
Yeah.
and they came to just be with us. And I will always remember that. And it meant the world to us. I think, too, to be able to process with people besides one another because we both were hurting in different ways.
Mm.
I had to experience the miscarriage.
Yeah.
My husband had to be the strong one when I was in a ball on the floor. And yet, neither one of us felt strong in any
Yeah.
of that. And so, yeah, it's hard as it is, be there for those people. And I think too, like it has to be okay to be a little awkward, like even to just say, like, I know you're really hurting and I don't know what I wish I could fix it. And I know that I can't, and nor would you want me to. Like I'm not God.
Mm.
So, how can I help you? How can I be with you in it, even though I didn't just experience, the ache that you're experiencing? And I do think that kind of the infertility community, the women and men who have that, feels like a label on your forehead that everybody knows,
Yeah.
look how old they are and they don't have kids. Did they decide not to have kids? Are
Mm.
they struggling to have kids? Like you can't help but think and wonder.
Mm-hmm.
And we feel that, like we feel there's a label on us and I don't know, it's not condemnation. It's just people are curious by nature. And so I think when our hearts are in the right place to want to love and support someone going through that, to just admit, like, I'm not going to do this perfectly, but tell me how I can love you in it. And some people want to talk about it. Some people are like, no, I don't want to talk about it. So you're going to have to, ask that particular friend where they're at with it.
Yeah, and then just be okay with whatever their response is.
Yeah.
Were your
Yeah.
were your friends or had your friends that came and talked to you guys, had they been through a miscarriage or anything, or were they just there ready to talk about something they had
Yeah.
no idea?
I don't think they had.
Wow.
I mean, it didn't come up, and um, they just wanted to be there and pray for us, and I guess that's the other thing was prayer, like somebody willing to be with me and
Mm-hmm.
pray,
Mm-hmm.
and not just ask God to grant me my wish, but to ask God to comfort me,
Mm-hmm.
even if He never did.
Yeah.
Because there's always that too. Like when you're going through this struggle, it's like, will I ever have this thing that I long for? And you don't know.
Yeah.
You don't know the answer to that.
Oh, that's so hard. And I think it's just hard, like you said, how you were the one that had to experience the miscarriage, and when it is your body, and it's like, this is what we were made for, and this is,
Hmm.
all my parts should be working. So for any woman who experiences any sort of misfiring or like wrong wiring for their body, you feel it so deeply, because like you feel like this is what you were meant to do, like this
Yeah.
is what your body should do. So then it gives you that sense of like there's something wrong with me, because and
Hmm.
that is so hard to mentally overcome, I can imagine, because, especially something that you've been longing for like a baby, like that's something that
Yeah.
you just long for.
And I think there's shame too. Like,
Yeah.
as you're talking about that, just, looking around, and it appears that everyone got it easily, which you
Yeah.
don't,
Right.
like, not everybody gets pregnant easily. Um, but it appears that there is something wrong with you, and the enemy wants you to believe that you're broken, and that, there is reason for shame, and that you should hide instead of being open about what you're going through. And so it's an even deeper wound, other than just, I can't get pregnant or I miscarried. It's there, I am broken in a way that is unhealable, which it's not true.
Yeah, definitely not. But yeah, it definitely is hard. I think going through any sort of trial, you feel like your world has stopped, and then you look around you and everybody is still moving,
Yeah.
and you're just like, it's just a weird, like surreal and hard
Mm-hmm.
place to be in, where you feel like everybody's life is continuing and you're just kind of stuck in this one
Yeah.
place. Life is
It's
messy.
hard.
Yeah, life is messy.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just like, I think it's awesome that you guys pursued this. And was that something also that you had to overcome? Like like I think that, or for me, in my opinion, and I don't know if this is an issue at all, but like just how you think of creating a child as two people coming together, and it's like this super intimate moment. But then when you do like IVF or the embryo adoption or anything like that, where you have to include physicians and stuff, was that something that you had to get over? You know what I'm kind of saying?
Yeah.
Just that, like it's no longer this like intimate in our bedroom,
Yeah.
person to person thing. Now it's like you're on a cold, table, and
Mm-hmm.
you have doctors all up in there, and
Yeah. And there's a monitor, television monitor,
yeah,
that shows you what your uterus looks
you're like,
like.
yay.
Yeah. I mean, I will say, our doctor does a great job of making it a warm, intimate experience.
Yeah.
Not in the same way that your bedroom would be, but yeah, there was definitely that to get over. It Along with that, it's just kind of an odd experience to be like, well, next week I'm going to go try to get pregnant at the doctor's
Yeah.
office, and people who are close to me know, are going to know the result much longer than they would had I, gotten pregnant the natural way, and at 12 weeks decided to announce it,
Yeah.
So it seems like you're pregnant for an eternity,
Right.
because it's like, well, it was May 3rd,
Yeah.
and, I'm not even showing, but
Yeah.
I've been pregnant for a really long time, according to what everybody else knows. Um, so yeah, it's all odd, but there is a level of intimacy. It's more emotional intimacy of, you know, making our plan and having conversation about, when we're going to go and how we're going to, what are we going to do with our 2.5-year-old? Because she's not allowed in the procedure. And
Yeah.
just figuring out, like, what timing works good for our family to go do this. And we actually wanted to go last summer. But my daughter was not giving up the boob. And so we were literally weaned at the end of July. And so, we waited an additional year than what we expected. But all of those things, like the planning and the coming together to figure out, like, because our embryos are in California. So it's not just like, let's go down the street. We have to make a deal out of it. But so that's where, our intimacy comes in on this. And, he's in the room with me holding my hand, and, to see that happen is a miracle.
Yeah.
And you don't know. I mean, you have to wait to find out, just like you would with any other pregnancy. But it's like, wow, for a moment there, like, we really could be pregnant, and we're going to act as if we are and savor. Last time I did 48 hours of bed rest. And so we had 48 hours to just sit around and be like, well, could this be true? Could
Yeah.
this be happening? And so you find ways to, build some intimacy into it, even though it feels very mechanical.
Yeah. Yeah, I could see that how it's not less than, it's just a different.
Yeah.
Either way, life is life and it's beautiful no matter how it comes,
Mhm.
and yeah. And I do have one more question that I wanted to ask before we get into my last
Sure.
three questions was, um, if you guys have to overcome like the stigma or the feeling of being older parents.
Ah. Um,
Yeah, you're like, I just know that, like, I have friends that are moms that are older, and I feel like sometimes, it's like they feel different. Like every woman is different. They feel different struggles in that, but like
mhm.
sometimes they feel like out of place because everybody their kids' age is younger or whatever, or
Oh, yeah.
judged or stigmas or whatever. I was just curious if you kind of had to deal with any of that, or if you even care, or if you're just like, whatever.
Well, as I said at the beginning, this is my year of owning my age. And the good news is, I don't look 47.
Yeah, you
I hate
don't.
to even say
No.
that that's the good news, but people are always shocked
Mm.
when I share my age, and I think don't believe me and regularly forget how old I am. So I feel like I kind of have that easy. I'm guessing it's gonna get harder later. So like when we have teenagers, I mean, I have wrinkles now, and I have friends whose parents are my age, and I have, my high school friends all have kids who are either in college or out of college by now, so grown kids. So, I do run with a different crowd
Mm-hmm.
than I feel like I would had I had kids younger. But some of that's just coincidence.
Yeah.
Like, you have an infant, you're going to a breastfeeding class, you're going to meet a bunch of other people who are breastfeeding. And the truth is, there aren't a lot of 47-year-olds that have 2.5-year-old kids.
Yeah.
And so, we, I think, take it in stride. We still feel pretty young, although, I'm thankful I have nothing to compare it to. I think if I had experienced pregnancy at 25, I might not be doing this again. But you just kind of take what you've been given. And I, I kind of love having younger friends, and actually I have younger friends who have older kids, obviously.
Yeah.
And so that's been fun in our community, where I think I always had this bias of like age meant wisdom,
Mm.
and a lot of times, like cases, it does, but it's not exclusive. Like
Mm-hmm.
I have wise mom friends that have been doing this far longer than I have, and I feel pretty challenged as a parent. We're having some tantrums this last couple of weeks, and I'm like, I don't know what to do.
Yeah.
Like I really do not have an answer, and so it's been sweet in our community to just be like, hey, we're all in this together. It doesn't matter who's older or younger or more experienced or less. Like, let's just help one another through it. So,
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you, is if you had any trouble connecting with moms, but
not,
I'm assuming you
yeah,
don't.
not yet.
Yeah. See, and
I
I was
probably have more trouble connecting with moms who are my age
really.
because their kids are grown,
Oh, yeah, I guess that's true. Yeah, see, we
So,
had that same issue because we were younger. So we had our daughter when I was 22. And so now, this generation that we're in, most of our friends waited, or at least everybody in our Sunday
yeah.
school class waited, until they were focusing on their careers. And that's just kind of what people are doing now is, focusing on their careers and then waiting until they're in their 30s or whatever to have kids. And so here we were at 22 or I'm 22 and my husband was 24. And so we're like, this young couple with kids, and then we had a second kid, and everybody, people our age are like, hey, let's go out for dinner, and we're like,
Yeah.
sure, what time? And they're like, 9, let's meet up at 9. And we're like,
Not a chance.
yeah, like, and then but we had a difficult time because then people with kids our age were older, but I guess maybe because that generation just didn't look at community the same way, to where when they didn't want to hang out with us because we were younger. And so we were just kind of like, what do we do? Like, we don't have anybody to talk to. Like, so
Mhm.
that was really challenging. And so I was curious to see if you guys have the same. But I think that yeah, just not even looking at anybody at as like an age, but just like, let's do like you're a mom, I'm
Yeah.
a mom, like let's do life together. And I think we'd all be better for that instead of,
Oh my
yeah.
gosh. Yes. There's so much value in mixing the generations.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's the things that don't matter, like which songs did you listen to in high school? Like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, great. We can't, laugh about those things or
Yeah.
talk about those things in the same way. But yeah, the things that really matter, like I want my daughter to um, grow up knowing people who
Mm-hmm.
are older, and, like, care for and respect the elderly. And,
Yeah.
I
The
mean, not only
elderly.
because we're going to be there quickly, but I mean, we were joking. So we went to an event at a 55 and over community the other day, and we were like, "Ooh, it'd be so nice to live in this beautiful community." And we were like, "But our daughter would have no
Yeah.
friends." And it's like, well, she could befriend the grandmas
Yeah, she'd
next
have like
door.
1,000 grandmothers. We just
Yeah.
moved in, our mom, or my mom, and she's actually one of the younger women at her like retirement community. And she's 66, but we moved her in there. And when we take our kids up there to like visit and hang out, man, it's like they're like, come here, give me a hug. And they're like, I mean, it's like, so I told them, after like the first week, I'm like, you just like, you have to understand, they like, you just gained like 100 grandparents right now. Like,
Mhm.
but yeah, that's good.
We got to get back to that. It takes a village thing
Yeah,
too. Like, we all can't do this solo.
no.
There's no way.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that was kind of I mean, well, obviously that is the reason I made this podcast, is because I went through that
Yep.
of being in that place of like, I have no community, but like I freaking need one because I don't know what I'm doing, and it's just hard. Like, no matter who you are, being in your house all day or being at work all, like, there, tantrums and being sleep deprived and trying to also be like this superwoman wife that's super sexy but like does all the things, and it's just so much, and to do it alone is just like so hard, and you just want that friend to come over and bring the ice cream and just be like, let's just hang out in our
Right.
sweatpants and you
Yeah.
know be okay with not being Barbie and
Yeah.
yeah,
With not being totally okay and
yeah.
perfect all the time.
Hmm. Yes, totally. Well,
Yeah.
yeah, I just want to acknowledge you and thank you for being on and sharing your story, and especially about the embryo adoption, because maybe there are some women who are listening that haven't heard about that, especially the organization that you used, and just getting that out there as an option is huge, I think,
Hmm.
and super helpful. And also just knowing that, no matter what age you are, or, we all struggle with same struggles of like dealing with the muddiness of newlywed, and being newly married and having kids. And yeah, so I just am so grateful for you sharing your story and hanging out with me. But before we end, I'm going to ask you the last three questions.
I'm ready.
So, if you could choose one of the books that you've read as the most influential book, what would it be?
Well, I know other guests of yours say this. I'm going to choose two.
Okay. Yeah.
So, and I mean, the Bible is the one that has changed me in more ways than I can count. And because it is living and active, it continues to change me. And so I can't answer the question without saying that.
Yeah.
But I know, like, you're looking for, like, what
No.
else? What else has been helpful? So there are a lot out there, but I think the one most significant to just my story and where I've kind of come in this life, there's a book called Intimate Issues, and they also have a conference. And I think it's Lorraine Dillow and her co-author, who I don't remember the name, but the book and their conference
Mm-hmm.
is exactly what it sounds like. It's intimate issues. So it's about sex and relationships and marriage. And I attended that conference when I was single, and some of the topics that came up, they're really intentional about whether you're single or married, that you have got to heal from the sexual sin of your past, whatever that looks like. And they share the story of the woman from Luke 7 who finds Jesus having dinner at the Pharisee's home, and she kneels at his feet and weeps and, dries his feet with her hair, and like is totally submitted to him. And, you know, it doesn't say this, but, she's probably a prostitute or has had several husbands, or, however the story might go. But they're just really intentional in that book to, identify like there's a lot of intimate issues we have in our lives that we need to talk about.
Yeah.
And first, we've got to heal and receive the forgiveness of Christ for the sin in our past, because that's what the enemy is going to use to tell us we have no right to, the joy and intimacy that God designed marriage for. So that book was huge for me. So I highly recommend it. It's been out a long time, but still a good one.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, there are definitely books that, you just come upon. I feel like in sometimes books you find them when you're like actively looking, or they just come up in the right time, in the right season for things. But yeah, I think that especially if you have like engaged in sex before marriage, like there's a lot that can happen that when you like do get married, it's like, just like expectations or whatever. It's like just totally carrying all that baggage that you have to figure out okay, what do I do with this now?
Yeah, and stuffing it is one option, but it's going to come out somehow.
Yes.
Sideways.
And it's not always pretty. Yeah, exactly. So if you could empower women in one way, what would it be?
So I love this question. My hope is that I'm already doing that on my own podcast, but I really want women, and this is for me as much as for anyone else, but I want women to know their identity in Christ and their belovedness as a result of that. Because I think we walk around with a lot of negative self-talk in our hearts and our minds, and that if that could change, like if we never is hard, but if we limited the negative self-talk toward ourselves and others, I feel like we as women could be an incredible force for God's kingdom. So that's really my hope, is that we would know our belovedness.
Yeah. And real quick, I wanted you to take a minute and tell us about your podcast, because I haven't asked you about that yet. But yeah, like,
sure.
So in case anybody's listening, I think that you should definitely let us know what that's about. So if they want to check it out, they can.
Well, and they can go check out your episode, which went live on August 23rd. It's episode 56. So
yeah,
that was a good one. I loved it. But it's called the Devoted Dreamers Podcast. It's been around a little over a year, and I really started it to begin to talk to women about their God-shaped dreams. And so I started with friends and friends of friends, but interviewing women to talk about the things that God has put on their hearts to do with the life that he's given them. So women who have started nonprofits, or who have struggled with infertility and wanted to have kids, like it's anything, like they come on and they share how God has kind of drawn their heart to something, some cause or some purpose in this life, and then how he's kind of pointed them to pursue that and the struggles along the way. So I really love it. I feel like I've learned a ton from the 50 some women that I've talked to. So come check us out.
Yeah. And it was definitely fun to be on. And I love that I feel like it's kind of the same thing that, I feel like we both have the same desires for women and in different aspects. And your podcast is super encouraging, and just hearing what like women's dreams are, how big or small or how different they are. And it's just really neat to hear everybody's story. Or embarrass yourself about your own story on there.
Right. Well, we all struggle, and I think it's important to like know that
Yeah.
even the woman who looks the most confident out there, it still struggles and has fear, and that it's okay to just continue to walk forward in that.
Yeah, definitely. And then my last question is, if you could tell your younger self one thing, assuming that she would listen, what would it be?
Well, you mentioned this earlier, but that the romantic idea of happily ever after is a lie.
Yeah.
That if you're believing what Hollywood is putting out there, that love, relationships, and marriage are for you to receive, you're going to be terribly disappointed.
Yeah.
That instead, they're an opportunity for you to give out of the overflow of the grace and goodness that God has given you. And any attempt to get what you want, get what you need, is really going to destroy you, truly, and the role that you were intended to play in love and marriage. So I do believe that happily ever after is a real thing with Jesus in heaven. And so as we like seek him and know him and trust him above all else, even when it feels crazy to do so, even when it's hard to do so, I think that we can find the most hope and courage in this life from that, instead of, the Prince Charming that is never going to come.
Yeah. I was just thinking that when you were saying that. I'm like, somebody should write a book like with the Disney princesses, but because they never show you what happens after they get. So it's like at the end of every story, they just ride off in a carriage, and it's like, hearts, and there's doves flying everywhere, and it's like, and they live happily ever after. And then it's like,
Right.
but you didn't hear about how Belle and the Beast now have, conflict over this or that, or like that, Little Mermaid and her prince are struggling with infertility. Like, that's what they should talk about.
You and I should write that book.
I know. Okay.
That would be really fun.
We'd have,
Let's do it.
yeah. But yeah, I think yes, we definitely need to teach our kids young. And I think one way is just modeling life for our kids well, and that, we're struggling, and that's nice. Like the fairy tales are nice, and it's good for them for a while, but like,
It's not real.
Yeah. And I think that would make expectations and moving forward for everybody a lot easier, especially when they get into serious relationships and stuff.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, thank you for being on. I'm so
Thanks.
happy that I got to have you on my podcast, and I learned a lot that I didn't know. So where can everybody follow you, find the Devoted Dreamers podcast, and all those things?
Yeah, so the Devoted Dreamers podcast is on iTunes or Stitcher. I think it's even on Google Play, but you can also find the show notes and all the different episodes on my website at meritansa.com/podcast. And then I really like hanging out on Instagram. So I post all my new episodes there, and my handle is MERITJO, so MERRITTJO.
I hope you guys enjoyed that episode. I am, again, so grateful for Merit to be on the podcast, and I hope you check out her own podcast at iTunes or Stitcher or Google Play, and it is the Devoted Dreamers podcast. I have linked her Instagram, her podcast, and her website on the show notes page that you can find at todayseden.com under podcast. I am hoping that you guys tune in again next week. I'm so grateful for you. I hope you consider leaving a review or rating on iTunes if you can. Also, the quote I want to leave you with today is, "I only do what my gut tells me to. I think it's smart to listen to other people's advice, but at the end of the day, you're the only one who can tell you what's right for you." And J-Lo said that. Man, I can only hope my butt looks as good as J-Lo's in 10 years.